In 2015, I was a freshman in college. I roomed with my best friend Emily from high school. Before leaving for college, we had done research and found rumors online that our dorm building was haunted, but we didn't take it seriously. We lived on the second floor, and our room was in between the stairwell and the laundry room. The first month went totally normal, and we were settled into our new routines. One day when I got home from class and walked in the room, everything was open. All the drawers on both of our desks, dressers, and tall standing wardrobes. My first thought was that someone broke into our room and robbed us, but then that didn't make sense because you could only access our room with 2 key cards. One was mine and the other was Emily's. Nobody else's key cards would be able to unlock our door. I called Emily to see if she was in class, but she was in the bathroom down the hall. When she came back, I showed her the room, and she said it wasn't like that when she left. At the time, we both thought it was the other one playing a prank, but neither of us said it. Over the next couple of months, more things started happening that proved to both of us that it wasn't the other one playing pranks. We often came home to everything being open, but that's not it. At night, when we were both in bed, we could hear our laundry baskets being dragged across the floor and things falling off of our shelves. One time, when we were both in our beds with the lights out, I sneezed and clearly heard, "Bless you." When I said thank you, thinking it was Emily, I looked across the room and realized she was asleep. I also heard "hello" whispered in my ear a few times. Another time at night, I was up late studying and Em was asleep. I felt like I was being watched all night, but just told myself I was tired and paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a light shove on my back. Obviously, this scared the life out of me, so I got up to yell at Emily, but then saw she was still in her bed. Once when Emily was in the room by herself, she was on the phone with her dad talking about all the weird stuff that had been happening to us. And of course, right on cue, all at once, every single drawer flew open. After about a month of us being terrified, we got up the courage to talk to our RHD about everything. We started with something like, "So we had a weird question about our room." When she stopped us and said, "Let me guess, stuff is moving around and you don't know why?" "Excuse me? What?" She said every year she gets reports from people that live in that room with stories the same as ours. It's happened for years, she said. She told us that it was the ghost of a little girl named Sarah who was known to be mischievous and liked to mess around. To be honest, this part of the story I'm not sure I buy 100%, but it made us feel a lot better to tell ourselves it was just a girl. After a couple of months, things settled down and occurrences became less frequent. We eventually felt comfortable in our room, and if something happened, we would just tell ourselves it was Sarah messing around again and brushed it off. Even though we were scared at times, we both agreed that nothing ever felt evil or sinister. It did indeed just seem like a mischievous spirit, but either way, we never taunted it or tried to talk to it. I have told this story before in a public setting around 2008. I was living in Louisiana at the time and had called into Coast to Coast AM and told this story to George Norrie, which was a pretty cool experience. I didn't have a whole lot of time to tell some of the details, so you'll be getting the unedited version, so to speak. It happened somewhere between 1997 and 1999. I was in my late teens and we were living in New Mexico up near the Four Corners. My parents were pastors at a local church in a very small town. We had lived outside of town, sort of out in the middle of nowhere, and there were a few houses sprinkled around us. Surrounding us, at least where there were no houses, there was some brush and a lot of desert. Ever since we moved there, the locals told us about skinwalkers. Even people in the church warned us about them. One guy in the church swore up and down that when he was a truck driver, he saw a skinwalker in its human form running alongside his truck when he was going about 80 miles per hour. but since I didn't witness it, I just took him at his word. I had heard many different tales on the origins of skinwalkers, both from the locals and the Native Americans. There was a Native American who went to our church who still held on to his Navajo beliefs, who told me what I always assumed to be a more accurate description. He told me that when people of his tribe had a child out of incest, the tribe leaders take the baby out into the desert to be raised by wolves. The wolves would raise it and they would become skinwalkers, having the powers to turn into anything, animal, human, etc. The story fascinated me. He never seemed to know for sure that this was the accurate tale. Then he warned me to never whistle at night, which I thought was pretty weird, but I never did, until one night. It was in the fall, around 11 at night. I was in my bedroom, which was the furthest room from anyone in the house and near the garage, watching TV or playing PlayStation. My mother was in her bedroom. My dad was at the church studying, as he always did, till around midnight. My brother had a friend over that night, and they were going to spend the night on the back patio, which was a long rectangular room with screen windows all down it. Like I said, I was in my bedroom minding my own business when my brother and his friend came banging on my door. Annoyed, I opened the door, and my brother, who is 4 years younger than me, and his friend are both frightened. My brother said as they were in the patio goofing off, they heard someone walking around the backyard, and said what looked to be the top of a white bald head walk by the screen windows. Now, normally I would believe my brother, since he would never make this kind of stuff up, but his friend was a huge liar and had told tall tales about having been to Mars, even showing us the red dirt, which looked an awful lot like the red dirt you could find throughout the area, I might add. Of course, by this time I had experienced a lot of paranormal stuff, but I was still skeptical. Bravely and annoyed, I grabbed my jacket and a flashlight, and the three of us went out to the patio. It was always creepy at night because it was always so dark and the only light came from a nearby lamppost a few yards down the street. Our backyard was insanely small except for the right-hand side of it, which was a bit bigger but held a trampoline which took up the better part of it. We stepped out of the patio, my flashlight shining around the yard, but saw nothing. That was when I started hearing the crunching of leaves coming from the front yard. So the three of us went through the back gate to the front yard. Now, our front yard was huge and had roughly 9 apple trees. There was even a large creepy tree in the corner of the yard near the street I always stayed clear of for some reason. We had a close neighborhood. Literally on the other side of the wooden fence, it was a nice family that had a daughter about my brother's age, and they also had a bunch of chickens, and sometimes they would wander into our yard, so that is what I thought was walking around our front yard. Shining the flashlight around, of course, I couldn't see any chickens, but I did see something white walk behind a tree near the wooden fence. That was when I got very curious. The three of us walked slowly to the tree. I was being the protective big brother and kept the other two behind me. Before I knew it, I heard a loud whoosh and felt a gust of wind like something flew by us. My brother screamed out in pain. My brother always had his shirt off, which annoyed me because back then I was overweight and very self-conscious, but I noticed on his chest he had 3 long scratches across him. Scared and shocked, my brother ran back inside the house, leaving me and his friend. It all happened so quickly, but I ran towards the street where I was sure whatever it was had gone, his friend close behind me. Once we reached the end of the property, I could hear the sound of bare feet running down the paved road. I shined my light towards the sound, but never saw anything. So I whistled some tune, and from down the road I heard the same tune whistled back to me. Intrigued, I whistled again. This time a different tune, and again the same tune was whistled back. My brother's friends started getting scared and kept trying to get me to go back inside, but I was very intrigued. I whistled for the 3rd time, and that was when, very close by, we both heard a male voice say, "Hey kid, come here." There was no hesitation. The two of us bolted back inside. We went to go tell my mother what happened, and she was already frightened because she was tending to my brother's scratches on his chest. We told her what happened, and my mother told us to stay inside. My mother has had some pretty scary paranormal encounters before. I need to tell those stories soon as well, and she believed us. I've never forgotten that encounter. My brother brushes it off these days, making it out to be not a big deal, but I know differently, as does my mother. It's one of the few incidents in my life that literally bothers me to this day. First, some information about my great-grandmother. She was born to immigrant parents in 1911 and passed away at the age of 94. Her father was an Englishman and her mother was from Luxembourg. Most of her family spoke German as well as English. However, great-grandma only knew a little German. Gigi's mother only spoke German and was almost completely deaf. Gigi relied on either her sisters to translate the mangled German or a crude family sign language they had developed. Gigi grew up in rural North Dakota, and to frame the time period, she once told me about how when she was a little girl, her family would regularly barter with the members of the Mandan tribe, whom she described as real Indians, not like today. She also only attended the local school till about 6th grade. Later in life, she was not particularly bright, but not dumb. She was religious, but not a Bible thumper. The type of woman who would give you a religious birthday card and a Ninja Turtle action figure, who had a picture of Jesus but never said grace. The one thing she was always very serious about was how she met the devil. Gigi would tell the story when prompted, but she never seemed to enjoy it and was always consistent in her description. When she was 10 years old, she was misbehaving. Her father wasn't home, and her mother again didn't speak English. Her mother attempted to control her, but Gigi just ignored her. Finally, her mother tried to grab a hold of her, but Gigi flailed and almost hit her mother. Gigi's mother caught Gigi's hand and looked her cold in the eyes. She let her go and pointed at the closet and left the room. Gigi and her siblings were often sent to the closet as some sort of timeout, and she knew she had messed up, so she went to accept her punishment. When she opened the door, however, something was inside. She said the being had hooves and was covered in dark fur which subsided a bit on the torso and chest up to the face. The being had a man's face with dark eyes, an unkempt beard, and a mop of dirty black hair, and from only one side of its head rose a deer antler. Gigi said that being stepped forward slightly before she slammed the closet doors shut. She shrieked, and her mother came to see what the commotion was. She could only really cry and wave her arms, but her mother opened the closet door anyway, and it was gone. She was always very serious about that story, and admittedly writing it even now makes me feel off somehow. That's the story of how my great-grandmother met the devil. However, she also said that aliens gave her a stroke. A few years before she died, Gigi had a number of strokes. She was in her 90s at the time. The first was not debilitating, it just took some time to recover. Some more quick info. Her and her husband, my great-grandfather, adored fast food. They had to substance hunt during the Depression to feed their children, so they marveled at good fast food. Great-grandpa loved McDonald's, but Gigi loved pizza, specifically Godfather's Pizza. After she had mostly recovered from her stroke, my family took my great-grandparents to Godfather's as a kind of celebration. But being a dumb kid, I got a bunch of quarters from my dad for arcade games and ignored my nonagenarian great-grandparents. To this day, I regret not spending more time with them. I had an odd number of quarters after the games, and the restaurant had one of those little toy dispensers, the ones with plastic egg things. I bought one with my last quarter, and it was a tiny plastic alien giving a peace sign. Done with the games, I returned to the table. I was fiddling with the alien, classic gray-looking, and Gigi noticed. When I set the alien down, Gigi took it and inspected it closely. With everyone at the table, she held up the alien and looked at me and said, Them's the thing that come and got me." My mom, half laughing, said, "What, Grandma?" Gigi repeated herself, and then said they were the reason she was in the hospital. When my grandfather, Gigi's son-in-law, told her she was in the hospital because of a stroke, she said, "Them things gave me the stroke." The family sort of stopped pressing at this point and things settled down. Most of my family chalked it up to a joke or her stroke. I don't buy it as a joke. Gigi was sweet, but not a joker. Furthermore, I don't think she knew what a gray alien was. She hadn't seen a movie since the 1950s, she didn't watch TV, and she only really read the newspaper. She mostly did crafts and listened to music in her spare time. As for it being a stroke hallucination, maybe, but it's still weird. So this event happened approximately a week ago. I was going to post then, but I wanted to let this digest a bit and not post on a knee-jerk reaction. I'm a police officer in a city of about 30,000 people. I am currently assigned to our midnight shift, working the hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. At the beginning of my shift, I am called to a house in what can be described as the wealthiest part of town. I am told by dispatch that the resident of the house, a teenage girl, believes that an adult male is attempting to enter the home. I activated my lights and sirens and arrived at the home at a short time later. I knock on the door and make contact with the caller, a frantic 18-year-old girl. My sergeant arrives, on scene a short time later. I ask her to describe what happened. She explains that while laying on the couch she heard pounding on the front door. She then looked out the peep and did not see anyone. She then heard banging on the back sliding glass door and screaming coming from outside. Again, she didn't see anyone. We ask if anyone made entry into the home. The complainant denies this. My sergeant and I check the area, finding no footprints in the yard. We also check the dew in the grass, finding it to be undisturbed. We also checked the glass for fingerprints and were unable to locate any. We chalked it up to this girl's friends playing a prank on her or her having an overactive imagination and leave the house. Approximately 3 hours later, we are called back to the residence. We are notified that the female believes someone to be inside the home this time. I beat my partner to the house by approximately 3 to 4 minutes. I enter and begin speaking with the complainant, who is visibly shaken. I am told that she was awoken by more banging and a man saying, "I know you are in here." The complainant states that she had barricaded the basement door with a chair, as she believes someone could easily enter the home through the attached garage. I tell her to stay put in the living room and go to search the basement garage. I draw my firearm and search the basement. During my search, I feel very uneasy, as if though I'm being watched. I complete my search as my partner arrives. I walk back upstairs and meet with her and tell her that I haven't cleared the rest of the home yet. She draws her weapon and helps me search the rest of the home. The last room we enter belongs to the complainant, and it's her bedroom. Inside the bedroom, we find a Ouija board to be in plain view. We deem the residence safe and go back to the living room. At this point, the complainant is frantically shaking and crying. We ask if she lives alone. She states that she stays with her grandparents. She also states that they are out of town on business. She states that she is frequently home alone due to her grandparents being out of town on business. I ask her to call and speak with her grandpa. I speak with him and learn that the complainant does not have any mental health issues, nor any behavioral issues. The complainant also does not use any form of drugs that he knows of besides nicotine. The grandpa states he is going to call another family member to come look after the complainant. We speak with the complainant again, learning that she does not currently suffer from mental illnesses. The complainant admits to smoking recreationally occasionally, but not partaking on any of the night of the disturbance. The complainant also advised us that she found the Ouija board that day hidden in a closet of the home. Her condition further degraded and she requested that we take her somewhere else. My partner, being a female officer, transported the complainant back to our HQ, where she was picked up by a family member at a later time. I stayed at the home and searched the surrounding area again. I again did not locate any signs of a person being outside the home. I don't know if this is the right place to post this, but I believe this girl may have experienced something. I for sure did not feel good whilst being in that basement. I used to be a huge skeptic of the paranormal until I took this job. However, I have experienced and dealt with multiple things that I couldn't explain in regards to calls to service. My partner also stated to feel very uneasy while being in the house. Anyone think she may have stumbled across something, or did we just feed into the paranoia of a young girl who was home alone? Unfortunately, I have not been called out to the home ever since, so I haven't gotten to investigate into this occurrence any further. So this first story took place when I was around the age of 7. I vividly remember me and my twin brother were just playing around in our backyard like little kids do. I remember we were sitting on the ground and playing around one of those heavy parasol things, which had no parasol in it. Eventually, me and my brother both sat around the parasol stand, just playing with some little toy cars or something. This is the moment me and my brother both saw a pale hand coming out of the hole on the top. Me, being the curious kid I was, touched the hand and I remember it felt very cold. Eventually the hand just slid back into the parasol stand, and we weren't really freaked out for some reason. We calmly explained to our mom what had happened, and obviously she just played it off like it was just our imagination. To this day, around 15 years later, me and my brother both swear to God we both saw that hand. The second story is about me having really weird night terrors when I was younger. So I would say I was around the age of 5 when the story took place, and I remember it would happen almost every other night. So I would be laying in bed, sound asleep, and all of a sudden I would just randomly wake up in the middle of the night. I'm guessing this would be around 2 to 3 a.m. As my eyes got adjusted to the dark, I would start to look around my room, wondering what woke me up. Eventually, once my eyes had fully adjusted to the dark, I would see this pale hand coming out of my wall, which would be coming towards me, trying to touch me. This would happen so frequently that I just got used to it and would just leave my room for about half an hour, and then I would come back and go back to sleep. The strange thing is, the wall the hand was coming from was one of the outer walls of our house on the second floor, so nobody should have been able to get to me, even if there was a hole in that wall, which wasn't the case, obviously. Also, the fact that I always woke up before this happened makes it impossible to write off as a bad dream. It also wasn't sleep paralysis because I was able to look around, move my arms and legs, and I could also get up. Fast forward to a few years later, and we found out our house was built almost on top of a historic burial site where a famous murderer from the 1700s was presumably buried. I did some research on this criminal, and he did not have a happy ending. According to a diary from someone who witnessed his execution back in 1775, he was strapped down in a chair for 114 consecutive days before he was brutally executed. Was it just my childhood imagination, or was it the criminal trying to make one more victim from the grave? I used to work at a diner in Spanish Fork, Utah. It is a small diner, but pretty active with ghosts. The first experience I heard about was when a coworker of mine, Mia, had something thrown at her. I was present when this happened, but had my back turned on her, so I didn't see it directly. I just suddenly heard Mia and my manager yelling in shock. I asked what happened, and Mia said, "I was just printing labels and the container fell and hit my thigh." I know layouts are normally useless, but I believe a layout explanation is necessary here so you understand why we were all so shocked. Mia was standing at the computer, which we had in the server's aisle. It was an open restaurant, so the only thing separating the server's aisle was a bar. To the left of the bar was a little closed-in section with hot sauce and other condiments, ice, and iced tea and coffee in their respective brewers. The iced tea brewer was at the far left, closest to the wall. The computer was in a cart in front of the brewer. This is where Mia was standing, printing labels. On top of the iced tea brewer was the brew funnel. The brew funnel was what ended up hitting Mia on her thigh. It's important to mention, though, that it was pretty far back, so it couldn't have just fallen. And even if it did, it wouldn't have hit Mia's thigh. It would have just fallen straight down. Our manager said that it looked like someone swiped it off the iced tea brewer, but gravity ultimately won, and instead of hitting Mia on the head, it was on a path to hit her on the head. It hit her on her thigh. After that, Mia and I spent a lot of time talking about how haunted the diner is. She had been there since it opened, so she told me a lot of stories that I wasn't aware of before. She said that scissors, knives, and other dangerous and/or heavy objects had been thrown at the employees. She also shared the theory that the reason why businesses located at that building never made it past 5 years was because it was on cursed ground. Spanish Fork is one of the locations where a war between Native Americans and Mormon settlers took place, so I believed it. I asked her if anyone had died at the restaurant, and she said, yes, some construction workers died. After hearing that, I thought I'd ask more of my coworkers, and, well, it wasn't in vain, to say the least. Another coworker, Madison, told me about the time she had an experience. She told me she had gone to the bathroom, and while she was doing her business, she heard someone coming in and going into the handicap stall. Madison finished and went over to wash her hands, but she noticed that the handicap stall door was ajar. When she finished washing her hands, she checked the stall, and to her surprise, no one was there. She said the person was particularly loud when they first went into the bathroom, so Madison found it weird that she didn't hear the person getting out. After returning to the server's aisle, it dawned on her that the restaurant was empty as the rush had been over, and her and the other servers were cleaning up for the next shift. Then I talked to Madison's brother, Caden, who was a graveyard cook at the time. He said that he had seen 2 different apparitions while working that shift. The first one was when he saw someone walking to the dry storage room. He thought it was the server he was working with, Taya, so he went to see if she needed help. Layout of the back house, dish room to the left, then manager's office adjacent to the dish room. The kitchen was to the right, and behind the kitchen was the walk-in and freezer. Behind the dish room was the dry storage room. When he reached the dish room, he saw that no one was there, so he thought maybe Taya had gone to the walk-in. He checked, and she wasn't there. He checked the dish room, and nothing, so he went out to the front of the house. To his surprise, she was clear in the back, taking drinks to a table, so there's no way she would have been able to go to the back of the house, fill the cups, and take the drinks to said table in the time it took Caden to check the back. The next one happened a few weeks after that. He was cleaning the kitchen and just trying to make time go by as it had been a slower night. He looked up and saw a little boy running towards the door to exit the restaurant. Caden later told Taya, "What kind of parent would bring their child to a restaurant at 3 a.m.? Taya was clearly confused and told him that she hadn't served any tables with kids that whole night. The next stories happened to me. I was taking a table's order one day and saw someone walking behind me. It distracted me and I looked behind me, but there was no one there. I looked to where the bathrooms were because I thought maybe that's where the person was headed, but there was no one there either. The only person who was near me, other than the people at my table, was my coworker Lauren. She was to the left of me setting tables, so she couldn't have been the one who walked behind me to go to the bathrooms, which were to the right. I know someone walked behind me. I saw it, but I also felt it. You know those vibrations you feel when someone walks near you? I felt that, and the wind that comes after someone walks by you. I've seen shadow figures all over the place. One was even charging towards me. I've seen chairs moving, and my name has been said by disembodied voices. One time, a child ghost, maybe the same one Caden saw, dropped my tray full of cups of water. All of them broke and I got wet. I know it was a ghost because there was no way that tray could have fallen, but I also heard a child laughing after the tray fell. Not only that, but I also felt the presence of a younger spirit. Needless to say, that diner is definitely haunted by several spirits. Some seem angry at us, whereas others seem like troublemakers or even lost souls. I'm a 28-year-old female. I currently work as a cardiac monitor technician in a hospital 30 minutes south of a major city. The hospital is actually relatively new. It opened independently in the early 90s, but by the year 2000, it was bought by a Catholic organization, and the sisters completely changed the way the hospital was run. For those who don't know, hospitals who are trauma certified are qualified and governed by state laws. The level qualifications vary from state to state, but just know that level 1 trauma is the most severe. We're talking gunshot wounds, motor vehicle crashes, stabbings, basically the worst of the worst emergencies. The level designation is in place to determine where patients who are being brought in by ambulance should go depending on the severity of the situation. This is all relevant, as my hospital used to be a level 1 trauma center in the 2000s, but to put it bluntly, there is no money to be made in trauma work. These patients often have little to no insurance and cannot pay, or they don't make it. Therefore, it was decided by corporate that we would no longer offer trauma services, and severe cases would have to be airlifted out to the nearest trauma center. As in any hospital, there is always death, both expected and unexpected. Not as much as you think, really. I mean, it's not like there's a death every day, but they do happen, and it's always a sobering thing, be it expected or not, at least for me. Because this used to be a trauma center, there were many, many more tragic cases and a lot more deaths back in those days. Sudden and unexpected deaths often ended in hauntings, and frankly, I believe that after what I experienced on this night. When I was new here several years ago, I got onto the topic of ghosts and the paranormal with a nurse I was working with at the time. I'll call her Nicole, as I truly believe my apartment back then was haunted. That's a story for another time. When I brought this up, she asked if I'd ever heard of the little girl with no face who haunts this big long hallway that connects the whole hospital, which we call the spine. I said, no, I haven't. Nicole went on to explain, well, supposedly she died when this place still took trauma cases. The rumor is that she was shot in a drive-by on her way to school and bled out and died in the ER before her parents got there, because she'd come in by ambulance. It's probably nonsense, I don't know. I don't know why she shows up in the spine, but a lot of people have seen her down there, and when they see her, she's got a long white dress on and no one can see her face. It's always a solid little girl with all the right features except all white and no eyes, no mouth, no nose. On the occasions where people have seen her, a patient goes on to die that night. It always seems to line up. I was pretty dumbfounded by this. For one or two people to see a ghost is unlikely, but for multiple people to give accounts of the same thing, plus documented deaths, there must be something behind it, right? It was about a year later that I had my own experience, and it made me 100% a believer for life. I work the overnight shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and since it's 12 hours, we always take a few breaks to get out of the room we sit in to watch the heart monitors. It's basically a broom closet, tiny, cramped, and hot, so I'm always happy to get out. I had gone into the break room, which is on the other end of my unit, and on that end to the right is a set of double doors leading into the spine. I walk into the break room, microwave my lunch, and sit there, enjoying the peace and quiet while eating my food. Once I'm done, I open the door to head back to my station when, out of the corner of my eye, I see someone standing in the spine. This is unusual as it's not a hallway the employees use at night. In fact, those doors are usually kept closed and no one is supposed to be out there, so this person immediately caught my attention. I turned to fully look at them and, I kid you not, there she is. all white, long flowing white gown, and no face. She has no facial features whatsoever, but she is facing me. As I froze and stared at her, I couldn't help but notice she wasn't actually touching the ground. The bottom of her dress was about 5 or 6 inches off the floor, like she was hovering. I felt a bad presence. In healthcare, you tend to go with your intuition or gut instincts about people and situations because sometimes it's all you have. As she stood there in front of me, I got this horrible, gut-churning feeling. A feeling like she had bad intentions, like she wanted to do harm. I don't know. Either way, it wasn't a pleasant feeling. It was one of those feelings where you feel like your heart dropped into your stomach. All the hairs in my entire body stand up and a shiver runs down my back as I stood there, maybe 20 feet away from this little girl, and my mind went absolutely blank as to what I should do. Do I acknowledge her? Do I just keep walking and pretend I didn't see her? I have no idea. At this point, I'm in such shock that I don't think I've gotten a word out anyway. My mouth was clenched shut. Just as I am questioning what I should do, she begins to change shape into what I can only describe as a mist or smoke, and moves quickly to the left side of the hallway and disappears just like that. As this happens, an ice-cold breeze wafts into me. I begin to internally freak out and quickly begin to speed walk back to the monitoring room, wondering what I had just witnessed. The best part is, the charge nurse relieving me for the break is the very same nurse who told me about the girl in the first place. As I return to the monitors, Nicole clearly notices I'm freaked out and shaken a little. Maybe I actually look like I saw a ghost, as they say. Nicole asked me what happened, and I explained to her everything that I saw, and she begins to freak out a little too. She says, "I wonder if someone's going to die tonight then." I'd completely forgotten about that part of the rumor, and now I begin to freak out even more. If someone did start dying, I'd be the first to know since I'm watching every patient's heart on the 3 computer monitors in front of me. It's hard to explain, but if someone is on the verge of death, there are obvious signs I look for. Coincidences do happen, of course, and as it happens, I did have a patient who was actually right across the hall from the room where I sit who was not doing well at all. Nicole's patient, he'd been in that room for approximately 2 weeks by then. He was terminally ill as it was. Lung cancer had metastasized and spread to his whole body, including his bones. Small cell lung cancer is very aggressive. Nothing to be done except manage the pain. I can't even begin to imagine the pain he must have been in. This poor man actually began to beg for death as the night dragged on, which made me wonder if the girl was perhaps an angel of mercy instead of something purely evil, because he got his wish. He was what is called a DNR. Do not resuscitate, meaning no life-saving measures. If he begins to die, then he dies. We do exactly nothing except make them comfortable. Given his sorry state and the amount of pain he was experiencing, if the girl was responsible, his last breath was truly a mercy. Listening to someone begging God to kill them and make all the pain stop is so gut-wrenching and heartbreaking. He did eventually begin to pass out at 3 a.m. I saw it start happening on the monitor. His heart rate just got slower and slower and slower, until there was nothing but a flat line. It's usually a somber thing, but I was actually grateful. He got what he wanted, and his pain was over. In the end, it would appear the rumor is true. The faceless girl in white appeared, and within a few hours, a patient passed away. Could be a coincidence, of course, but I find that highly unlikely. I think maybe she really is an angel of mercy, waiting for someone who is critically ill, willing or wants to go, and helping them pass on. Maybe that's why she sometimes appears before someone dies. It isn't that she maliciously is causing the deaths, but rather holding a sick person's hand as they cross to the other side. Maybe she facilitates that journey. Perhaps that's why I had the reaction to her that I did, and got that sick feeling that something bad was about to happen. But what may seem like something bad can actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise. At least, that's what I'd like to believe. I've been hearing and reading a lot lately about people having crazy experiences with shadow figures. I don't know why. Has there been an influx or something? And every time I do, I think of the experience I had with one when I was 13, about 8 years ago now. Back then, I had just gotten a loft bed, the black wooden one from IKEA to be specific. Every night when I go to sleep, I'd keep the TV on, which sat on my dresser across from the bed because the noise would lull me to sleep. Well, that night, the noise and the light was keeping me up, thanks radiation, so I decided to turn it off. When I did, my bedroom was pitch black, my door was closed, I didn't have any night lights, and no other devices were on. I rolled over onto my side, facing towards the wall, and closed my eyes. A few minutes went by and I was still wide awake. I was beginning to get frustrated because I still couldn't fall asleep. Just as I was thinking about this, I got the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. You know how you can just tell when someone's walked into the room, almost like the energy or density changes? Well, I had an older sister who had a habit of creeping into my room late at night to steal my stuff, so I thought, okay, it's just Hannah getting something. But when I opened my eyes, my room was still dark. This told me it wasn't her because whenever she'd come in, she'd leave the door open a crack and the hallway light would shine through. Plus, she's incredibly loud, although she tried her best to be as quiet as to not wake me up, but my room was absolutely silent. As soon as this realization dawned on me, an overwhelming sense of dread came over me. I knew someone was in the room with me, just as I know my own name, but since the human mind needs tangible proof of everything, I decided to check just in case I was imagining it. If you know anything about loft beds, you know those things are loud when you move, since you're basically propped up on stilts in the air. So as I moved, I tried to do so as quietly as possible so that whatever was in the room with me wasn't aware I was there, and knew it was there too. When I finally reached the slats and looked down through them, sure enough, there was this black figure in the shape of a person standing in front of my dresser. I straight up knew whatever this thing was, it was evil because A, malevolence practically oozed from it and spread over my bedroom, and B, this thing was literally blacker than the darkness of my bedroom. Like imagine being in a pitch black room, then a figure materializes, no tangible features, just a straight up filled in outline in the shape of a person that is darker than the dark. That's what this thing was. I don't know how, but as soon as I laid my eyes on this thing, I saw it turn its head and look at me. Again, it didn't have any features, so I didn't physically see its eyes looking at me, but it's almost like I could see it, feel it in my mind. It paralyzed me. Then it began moving and walking towards my ladder like it was going to climb up. I shot straight up in terror, knowing that if this thing got to me, something bad was sure to happen, and reached out my arm to turn on my ceiling fan light. Luckily, it was literally less than a foot away from where I was. I yelled out the guardian angel prayer as fast as I could, and my mouth stumbled over the words in my haste, and as soon as I finished, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace and love come over me like I've never felt before, as if something was there protecting me. When that feeling came, all sense of darkness and negativity just shattered. I was so calm and at peace, almost like I'd taken a Xanax, although I didn't know what that feeling was until years later, insert punchline drum sound, that I just flicked the light back off and instantly fell asleep. I haven't seen a shadow person since, but I do feel people or things standing near my bed at night all the time. It'll wake me up, but I'll never see anything. Whenever I feel like I'm not alone, I'll imagine a white light surrounding me and emanating from my body, and tell whatever it is in my mind that it's not welcome and must leave. Works every single time without fail, but the experience I had when I was 13 terrified me, and I hope it never happens again. My cousin and I have always been very close and very spiritual. Though we've always viewed our spirituality in different ways, we have always believed in ghosts. That was one of the many common threads that we talked about openly and frequently, especially when we figured out that not everyone believed in ghosts as well. About a decade ago, we were teenagers. My cousin and I lived across the country from one another. The separation in our spiritual perspectives was growing larger every time we spoke. He was very fascinated by demons and the macabre aspects of good versus evil. If he tried to fraternize with spirits, he aimed to hunt down demons or create an environment for them to be more likely to be present. That included carving pentagrams into any surface he could find, or basically just inviting these things around. I, on the other hand, didn't see any need to talk with demons. Human spirits and natural forces are far more interesting. I spent a lot of time meditating and trying to interact with any spirit I came across that didn't feel malignant. I like to think of myself as sensitive, but I'm not a full-on medium. I am open to those interactions, and I trust my gut as much as possible. I found a kindred spirit in a friend that I met at school, Clara. We became fast friends, and before long I found out that she believed in ghosts too. Her experiences tended to be a bit more traumatizing than my own, but she liked the kinder side of spirits and physically felt ill anytime she encountered a bad spirit. My cousin found a friend that believed in the paranormal as well. He introduced this friend to me, and after a while we started a long-distance relationship. I didn't know his feelings about ghosts, but I knew that if he was hanging out with Anthony, he probably had a feel for the macabre. Eventually, the time finally came that I could take my best friend up to see my family. I was very excited to get her up there. I wanted her to see the place that I have always considered to be my home, and I wanted her to get to know my cousin. He was like a brother to me, and it turned out she developed a little crush on him from my stories about him, chats, and pictures. I was also happy that I could finally hang out with my then-boyfriend in person. At some point, I told Anthony that Clara is sensitive like us. He seemed vaguely interested and mentioned that Ray, the guy I was seeing, was also sensitive. I thought that was neat and left it at that. Anthony had other plans. At the first opportunity he could find, Anthony suggested the four of us go for a walk, right as the sun was setting. He wanted to go to the park that was across the street from his apartment complex. It was a large wooded area with a winding walking path around a small lake. It was pretty nice. It had a playground for little kids, gazebos, and a handful of benches. There was a bridge or two over some wide streams. The park was lovely, and I was enthusiastic about going to it. Clara seemed happy to go, and Ray didn't have to be asked twice. It was only once we were outside and away from the adults that Anthony said that it was haunted. Clara seemed a little tense, but we went anyway. The air was a little brisk, and leaves crunched under our feet. There was a couple mounds of snow here and there, but nothing major. We could see the sunset through the tree branches, and we were all talking and laughing. At first, Ray would not stop touching me. It was a little awkward because my cousin and best friend were right there, but when Anthony walked ahead of us, Ray followed. It was a relief to hang back and talk to Clara. Once we were in the park, just past the playground, Anthony took us to the edge of the lake next to the walking path. We looked across the water, and Anthony told Clara about the ghost that he suspected was in the woods. Anthony hinted that he thought the spirit was evil, and Ray said that it looked just like his grandpa. I wasn't buying it. From where we were standing, everything just felt right. It was calm and serene. The breeze felt nice, and that crisp autumn air was intoxicating. I opened up my senses further, but I still didn't feel anything wrong. When it was time to start down the path, I drifted ahead of everyone. I could tell they were tense and a little freaked out, and I didn't want to get mixed up in it. I was on cloud 9. That is, at least until we took about a dozen steps into the wooded area. All of a sudden, I didn't feel safe being so far ahead and chalked it up to feeling guilty about not walking with my friends and family. I hung back until I was walking with them. It did not take long for Anthony to take the lead. Clara did not seem pleased to be taking that path, so I stayed close to her. Ray went from Anthony to me and back again. He was smiling, happy. Anthony walked with determination. The further we walked, the less eager and pleasant Ray became. By the time we crested the highest hill in the park, he was positively despondent. Meanwhile, Clara started asking if we could head back. I told her we were at the halfway point, and she was thoroughly unimpressed with that response. All the while, Anthony trudged on ahead. At the bottom of the hill, Clara needed to stop. Anthony came back to us, and Ray went to the nearest tree to peer into the dark that had settled around us. I wanted to keep going. There was a prickling feeling against my skin, and I felt very uncomfortable where we were. The trees were thick enough to block out the rest of the world, and it was legitimately dark out, but I kept my mouth shut. We only had a little further to go. I don't remember what scared everyone. Forgive me, but it was a decade ago, and I have a blank spot in my memory here. I remember that we stopped, and we were all nervous. The next memory I have is of Clara saying that she felt sick and either crying or about to. Ray was slowly creeping his way into the trees, away from the path. Most of all, I remember Anthony's panicked eyes and a look that just screamed, "What do I do?" Anthony has been the leader since before we could walk. He talks a big game and he makes the rules. He has always been the boss, and he looked at me for help. Something in me clicked as soon as I saw that look in his eyes. Immediately, I told him, "Get Clara out of here. I'll get Ray." For once, Anthony didn't argue. Usually any bossy tone from me earned a quip or a fight, but he didn't even say anything back to me. He went straight to Clara and walked her back down the path. All the while, he kept a protective arm around her shoulders. They left, and I was stuck with Ray. For a second, I didn't know what to do. Ray was stronger than me, so I couldn't pull him out. He wouldn't look at me, and he kept muttering something about his grandpa and going somewhere. He kept trying to walk into the trees, and I begged him not to go. He responded by wrapping his arms around a skinny sapling and staring off into the dark. I tried to pull him away, but he wouldn't budge. His muscles tensed and his brow furrowed when I touched him. In that moment, I was scared he would hit me, so I let him go. I pressed close to the nearest tree and tried to think of how I could convince him to leave. I guess I thought that whatever spirit he was connected with or wanted to connect with was what was keeping him there. I reasoned that the only way I was going to get him to come along was if I opened myself up spiritually and tried to take some pressure off of him. If that meant getting some attention from whatever was there or pushing it away, I wasn't sure. I just felt that I had to try. I mentally envisioned letting all my guards down. For a second, I felt all right. I was annoyed with Ray and I wanted to leave, but I was okay. I thought about grabbing him again, but didn't get a chance when I felt like all the air in my lungs whooshed out of my body. The world was suddenly a blur, and I felt myself being pulled through the trees by a force I couldn't see. I remember everything was heavily laden with snow. Every branch I passed was on the verge of snapping from the weight, and the ground ahead of me didn't have a single track or footprint. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't breathe. Finally, I was halted at the bottom of a tree. Above me, a dark shadow stared down. It looked like the outline of a very large, rotund monkey with a lion mane. It screamed out this grotesque, pig-like squealing laugh at me. I knew it was laughing at me, and that scared me all the more. I was on the verge of tears, and I felt myself rocket back to my body like a slingshot. I heaved in air, and my eyes stung with tears. My body shook all over, and that laugh just would not stop replaying in my head. Ray didn't even look at me as I struggled to regain my senses. We had to leave. We were not safe, and Ray wouldn't move. I looked back up the hill and saw the outline of a tall man next to something short. I couldn't figure out what the short thing was and decided it was a bench. I glanced at Ray and asked, "Do you see that?" He didn't even look. When I returned my gaze to the hill, I couldn't find the man again. Fed up, I grabbed Ray's sleeve and hauled him the best that I could onto the path. I just kept saying, "We have to go. We have to leave. Anthony and Clara already left." The more I talked to him and pulled, the more Ray tried to pull away. He was still talking about his grandpa. He wouldn't go with me until I yelled at him, "That thing is obviously not your grandpa. We're going." Slowly, he followed. I refused to go up that hill, so we finished the rest of the walking path. I helped Ray along until he started acting like himself again. The further we got, the more jovial he became. It was a little disturbing, and I was still shaken up by what I experienced. I have had out-of-body experiences before, but nothing as awful as that. By the time we reached the nearest gazebo, Ray was talkative and laughing. I wasn't listening. I just wanted out. I felt a lot better when Anthony met us at the playground. Clara wasn't with him. He was worried about us and said he couldn't leave us alone out there. Anthony took us to Clara. She was in the stairwell of the nearest apartment building, the one Ray lived in. Anthony knew the code because he and Ray were best friends. Clara had thrown up quite a bit. She wanted to go back to the apartment, and she didn't want to go in those woods ever again. She was really shaken up, and I was worried about her because she actually vomited. We walked back, and the boys were in high spirits. We were not. Clara and I told my aunt what happened in private, and she didn't seem surprised. She said that Anthony and Ray had been carving pentagrams into the gazebo out there, and she suspected that they were trying to summon something. She told them multiple times that they shouldn't do that, but they weren't the type to listen. Later, Anthony admitted that he took us out there because he wanted to test Clara. He wanted to know if she really was sensitive. He didn't seem to regret it in the slightest. He also let me know that there isn't a bench at the crest of the hill we were at when I told him what happened to me and Ray. I think all of our true colors shone that day, and I still get chills when I think about what I saw. My mother shared this story with me. Her and her friend, who shall remain nameless, were traveling after work from Great Falls, Montana for a camping trip at Holland Lake. The sky was darkened more than usual with impending storm clouds. Along the way, they had found themselves inadvertently sandwiched in a 3-semi convoy heading down the highway doing 55. As my mom and her friend passed Lincoln, Montana, a heavy downpour began, severely limiting their already limited field of vision. It was at this point that my mom and her friend were surprised when the passenger window completely dropped, in such a way that they were lucky the window didn't break. My mom and her friend looked at the now completely open window. There, they saw a figure that was hovering next to their open window, moving 55 miles per hour along with the vehicle. None of the semis seemed to react to this. My mom described the figure, of which she could only see the head and shoulders, as a man wearing a World War-era gas mask. They immediately pulled over at a bar in Clearwater Junction where they received a free shot each, the bartender commenting that they both looked like they just saw a ghost. Fast forward to 1987. My mom comes across the just-released Communion by Whitley Strieber and immediately freaks out. She shows the picture to her friend. The first thing her friend did was scream, and they yell at my mother to never, ever bring the incident up again. My dad always worked away fitting floors. One day he got offered a pretty big job in Malta, a remote small island near Italy. The pay was great, so we told him to go for it, but didn't expect him to be working away for so long. Weeks had gone by and my dad hadn't finished yet, so my mom suggested me and my sister catch a flight for the weekend to go and see him. I was really excited too, having a relaxing weekend away to see my dad, only that's not how it ended. When we got there, we were staying in a small apartment house with 3 floors. However, the top floor was run down and abandoned. The apartment was quite large and had 3 rooms, My mom stayed with my dad, and I chose the room before my sister, so she went to look at her room. She came out in shock and fear, and I said, "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I joked. "I want to sleep with you. There's a weird baby's cot in my room." I said okay and didn't think anything of it. Later that evening, we went for some food and drinks. We got back and were quite tired and jet-lagged, so we headed to sleep. As me and my sister were trying to sleep, we heard noises coming from the room above us and the sound of footsteps and furniture being moved around. This was weird too, because the room was abandoned. "Did you hear that?" my sister said. I was thinking it was my imagination, but when my sister said that, I began to panic a bit. "It's probably just the wind or something. Let's just go back to sleep," I said and brushed it off to the side. I got up and closed the door before heading off to sleep. Around 4 a.m., I woke up to a cold breeze, and I opened my eyes to see the door wide open. I looked back at my sister and said, "Did you open that?" She moaned no and rolled over. I rolled my eyes and turned back to the door, and my eyes took a shock as I saw an old lady standing in the doorway with long black hair, an old sleeping gown that they would wear in Victorian times. I couldn't think, so I rolled over and closed my eyes, praying it was my imagination. The next day was our last night there, and we went for food and explored the island. When we got home, we watched a few films and went to sleep. I had no problem sleeping that night, however, I still heard the footsteps in the room above. The next day, we were heading home to the airport at about 3 a.m. When we got to the airport, my sister stopped me, and what she said next sent shivers down my spine, and every hair stood up on my body. "I didn't want to tell you this until we had left, but last night when you were asleep, I woke up and saw a child watching you sleep. A little boy around the age of one that would use the cot in the other room. I closed my eyes straight away and hoped it wasn't real." My mouth just fell open. "So I'm not going crazy then?" I said to her. She shook her head in fear. "Well, at least it's over. I just feel sorry for poor Dad. He seemed to find it fine over there." I was getting ready to board the plane and wanted a book to read, so I headed to a shop to look for one. I was looking for about 5 minutes and then turned around and saw one side of the bookstore covered in books called The Ghosts of Malta. I was intrigued and decided to look at one. I got seated on the plane and then opened the book and felt a tear of fear run down my face when reading this. I was staying in a little town called Valencia, and I saw the town's name pop up on the book, and this made me drop all belief I was being crazy, and I knew what happened back there wasn't normal. It read, "Valencia is a well-known town in Malta for the haunting of an old lady and her son watching people at night." I couldn't believe what I was reading, and decided to bin it as soon as I got home. I don't know what happened when I was in Malta, but I knew I would never be returning. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And don't forget to clap them almond bobbies.